Hey, good morning, everybody. It's Thursday, January 29th, 2026. Thank you for joining me. I am Hammer, founder of Originator Success, Grab and Go Social, and Rate Sensei. Three products that will help my originator friends get more loans in 2026. Go check those out. Remember, you can join me live each and every weekday morning, 9:30 a.m. Eastern Time, as I talk about what's going on with rates and pricing and the mortgage market, the headlines, the technicals. We go a little bit deeper than I do on my written lock advice. If you are here live, say good morning. Remember, if you'd like to get my written lock advice, you could sign up for that at www.ratelockadvice.com. It's an email to your inbox each and every weekday morning, 9:30, well, maybe 10 o'clock a.m. Generally, it goes out. I'm going to probably start getting it out a little bit earlier, but anyway, it goes out there. If you would like a reminder that I'm live, though, you can sign up and get a text reminder at hmmr.io/reminder and go ahead and join me live. If you're here this morning, say good morning. Ron Siegel said today we celebrate National Corn Chip Day. Happy birthday to W.C. Fields, credited with one of Ron's favorite quotes. "'Twas a woman who drove me to drink, and I didn't have the decency to thank her." That is a fun quote. I think it's a fun quote. What's your favorite chip? Let's go ahead with that for the question of the day. Since Ron says today is not, man, I'll tell you this poor. Let me stop this thing from wiggling around like a beast here. Hold on. Let me just pop this up a little bit. Okay. That's not really helping yet. It will. But anyway, I have the camera. It was out too far. It was wiggling. So today is National Corn Chip Day. So the question of the day: what is your favorite chip? Potato, Frito, corn chip, like Fritos, Tostitos. So, what's your favorite chip? That's the question of the day. Go ahead and put that in the comments since Ron said today is National Chip Day. What is your favorite chip? I definitely like me some Fritos. I like Munchos. Munchos? They're really salty. Oh, I love salt. I love potato chips. Potato chips are terrible for you, though. Very fattening, full of calories. I'm a chip guy. I love me some chips, though. Lay's. Not big on the Ruffles, but Lay's. I do like Lay's. So, all right. Well, if you're here this morning, say good morning. If you're watching on the replay, don't forget to put hashtag replay in the comments. Let me know that you were here. And welcome to all of the live folks. Thank you so much for joining me. So happy to see all of you here. Let's go ahead and jump in and get started. Take a look at the technicals, and we'll start there this morning. So, all right, screen one. Taking a look here, we've got down here is the 48-hour chart. Of course, yesterday was the Fed day. We had the Fed policy statement at 2 p.m. Eastern time and Fed Chair Jerome Powell's comments at 2:30. If we start out right here at 2 p.m. Eastern time, you could see that there really was just a little bit of a movement here, not much at all, that we got after the Fed policy statement. I'm going to go deeper on that policy statement in a minute after I kind of summarize everything, and we'll take a look at why bonds lost a little bit of ground, but it really wasn't much at all. It looks almost worse than it was. Then around 2:30, Fed Chair Jerome Powell's policy statement. Bonds liked that. We saw an initial boost right here, and then they improved a little bit more on the day. Now, today you'll notice, though, after the Fed meeting, things were good. But today, you'll notice that we are losing ground. And that's because jobless claims this morning came in showing very little change in unemployment. Jobless claims ticked down to 209,000 during the holiday week. And continuing claims, this is key. Continuing claims, initial versus continuing. So here's initial. Look at how stable that's been, but look here at continuing claims as they move lower and lower and lower, the lowest since September of 2024. All right. So those are people that have been on unemployment for at least 1 week. So initial claims, that's their first week. And then continuing claims, anyone that remains on unemployment for at least 1 week. These are not the signs of a truly weak labor market. Now, I know it's not the strongest labor market, but it's also not a truly weak labor market. And that's why we're seeing that. So, as far as rate sheets this morning, taking a look again with where pricing came out yesterday, pricing came out around 10 a.m. Bonds were generally right around 100. We're down a couple of basis points. So we're down 14 bips on the day, but it's really not anything devastating because we had those gains yesterday. So we improved right here. And now those are positive when you see bond pricing go up. That's a good thing, right? It's green is good. But red, we went down, and that's what we've done this morning, and things are leveling out. Now, reprice risk on the day is moderate. As far as rate sheets go, it's going to look very similar to where we were at yesterday, and that's very similar to where we've been. I mean, 616, 615, 617, 620. We've improved a little bit. You see a little bit of improvement from day to day here from basically last Tuesday after the holiday. Remember, that was the jump. This was the day that we saw the big jump right here. That was the jump after the Japanese bond issue and the Greenland bomb drop there. So this was, we were at a wonderful spot. We were all the way down to 601. In fact, I'll circle that in green. That was our best arguably time frame. Again, using Mortgage News Daily as a reference point, you would have been able to quote rates in the fives here for sure. But just using it as a reference point, we ticked up a little bit and then jumped here after that whole Japanese bond issue and the Greenland, U.S. control of Greenland. After a deal was announced and things settled down and everybody markets saw that we weren't escalating and Trump wasn't going to threaten to go to war to take over Greenland. Things did improve a little bit. We've seen some improvements. So the worst level, 621, we've been down to, just a little bit better. And that's about where we're going to be. We're going to be about that same levels today with bonds based on what we're seeing here. Now, with that out of the way, let's take a look at the Fed outlook and talk a little bit about yesterday's Fed meeting and kind of summarize that meeting. What I'm going to do is let me pull up some of the articles that we'll reference here and we'll summarize that. Why does it do that to me? Piss me off. Come on. All right. So let me get this just lined up. So that's pretty close. All right. So taking a look here, like we saw, the Fed held rate steady. We knew that was going to happen the first time since July. So we'd seen 3 different rate cuts last year, and markets knew that there was not going to be a cut at this meeting. It was absolutely what was already predicted and being priced in. Taking a look at where we're at now, expectations of a cut drop all the way down. Still, barely more than 10% expectation in March. Grows a little bit in April, and I think these are both optimistic. I think these are gonna lose ground. Remember, Fed Chair Jerome Powell leaves in May, and that's when markets believe that there's actually a shot that we'll see a rate cut. And it's still only a 60% belief that we'll see a cut. It's not huge. So nobody's expecting a rate cut while Powell remains in. So the officials signaled greater comfort with a pause on rate cuts. 2 governors favored the reduction. Of course, the 2 governors that favored a rate cut, there were 2 dissensions in the vote. One was Waller and the other was Moran. Bowman knows that she has not been mentioned in quite a while for Fed chair. Moran is already Trump's puppet, so he's been pushing for huge rate cuts the entire time. His temporary governor standing, he was filling in a spot which actually expires this month in January. So Moran will continue to stay on board for a little while. Until there is an actual chair that or governor that is in there. So I'm looking to see where it mentions about Moran's. I think it was in this article. So Moran will stay there for now, but his term has ended, and they'll be filling that new term. So that they're going to need his position in order to put a new Fed chair in that's not one of the current Fed governors. So I'd have to Google it for sure, but I believe only the governors can be elected to Fed chair and not the presidents, because the presidents don't have the same term. But I'd have to look. So the Fed chair, what's funny is the two that dissented were Trump's puppet, said he wanted to see a quarter point cut, and Waller, who has been in again, out again in the mention of who could go ahead and be brought in for the new Fed chair. So take that as what it is. There were definitely some interesting things that were said that will kind of affect rates. Let's go into Mortgage News Daily, and let me go to the commentary here. And can we make this smaller? Let me make this smaller. Okay. So taking a look here, this is from Matt Graham and Mortgage News Daily, and he's showing what changed in the Fed announcement in the policy statement. And there's a few things that really kind of reading through here catch our attention. So the first one, we're just going to highlight the changes here, right? So it says that the economic activity has been expanding at a moderate pace. That was changed to a solid pace. That, again, it indicates that there's no reason for the Fed to consider cutting its policy rate if it thinks the economy is on a solid pace. They don't want to overheat the economy, and there's a lag between when the Fed cuts rates and when it goes. So arguably, we've seen 3 cuts in a row, and we could see that continue to build into the economy. Now, Trump wants to really heat up the economy, and he wants the Fed to cut rates and bring rates even lower. But the argument is that if the Fed did that, it would overheat the economy and they'd have to raise rates again. So it's really his claim that we have a very solid economy, and the document, the data that supports that is actually one of the things that really goes against his desire to have rates cut even further. If the economy is doing well and the labor market is not doing poorly, then we have what's called neutral rate, and the Fed does not need to cut or raise rates. And that's kind of there. Job gains, it talked about how they had slowed this year in the past, and now it says remained low. So they've kind of adapted that that's the way it's going to be. Unemployment rate, though, this is key. Instead of edging up with recent indicators consistent with the developments, it says the unemployment rate shown some signs of stabilization. Again, the Fed's dual mandate is to maximize employment and price stability, which is inflation. Now, Powell, in his comments during his press conference, he made a comment, and I don't know if it's in any of the articles, but I watched the press conferences, and he made a comment, and I'm paraphrasing, but it really this part caught my attention. He talked about that the core PCE inflation being above 2% at 2.9%, that the inflation was due to the price of goods and not due to inflation from wages. That's a big deal, because the price of goods, he went on to continue that they felt that it was because of the tariffs driving up the price of goods, which some people still want to argue, but it absolutely did drive up the price of goods. However, that's transitory, and the true word transitory, because it will happen and then it'll be done. It's not continuing inflation, which is what the Fed is really worried about. So if it happens and it's over, they expect inflation, it could start to continue to move lower. We're going to get wholesale inflation tomorrow. That's not enough it's not, it's kind of like a second fiddle report. And it's not going to make a big deal there. All right. I'm sorry. I'll come back to your comments. We'll come into the comments. So, but taking a look here at the rest of this, these are things that are important to know on where they're going and why markets believe there's really no reason for the Fed to cut as we go into things. The committee is attentive to the risk of both sides of its dual mandate. Judges' downside risk to employment rose in recent months. That has now been nullified. They took that out, right? And it just says the committee is attentive to the risk to both sides of its dual mandate. So that this right here, combined especially with stabilized unemployment, shows the Fed is not worried about jobs data and the labor market. The reason that I'm emphasizing this today is that next week we have the BLS jobs report. We've got the JOLTS data. We've got the ADP monthly report, because now they do that weekly report. And with all of that data coming out, normally that would be an indicator that we would be watching because it could help bonds. The fact that I said before we went into the Fed meeting yesterday that this meeting was likely to be one of the least reacted to in bonds, and it doesn't get any less reacted to than what we saw here. So absolutely the case, right? I mean, bonds were at around, when pricing came out, they were around 100.02. They improved to 100.9, 100.10. So we moved 8 basis points on the day. We went from slightly worse on the day to slightly better. Not enough to see any reprices better, by the way. That is really what we can expect to see next week with the jobs data. So if the jobs data is not likely to affect the Fed, then we're left with just the jobs data freestanding, and we don't expect to see a lot of jobs created. Markets don't expect to see a lot of jobs created unless there's a big jump in unemployment from 4 point. I think it went back to 4.4 last time. So unless there's a big jump in unemployment, there's really no reason to expect that rates can improve over the next week when we get the jobs data next week. I'm not expecting them to improve tomorrow when we get the wholesale producer price index PPI. I'm not expecting them to improve much next week with the other data. So, my outlook, I'll put it up here. It's tough to see any reason for much improvement, but on the same side, unlikely we see much of a push higher. Rates are very likely to stay in the range that we've seen here unless we get a Trump post, social post or something happening. We know that the GSEs are buying mortgage-backed securities. It appears to have been helping us recover a little bit from the jump in rates that we saw. But look at this 100.11 mark. You've got 100.11 here. You got 100.11 here. Yesterday, we were at 100.10, which we're going to call that 100.11 because 0.01 doesn't mean anything. That I feel like we are hitting a wall. And I feel like that is kind of the ceiling for mortgage-backed securities. And it would take something big to break us through that ceiling. So with that said, I would be looking to lock anything closing over the next 15 days for sure. And I would consider locking anything closing in 15 to 30. So if it closes in the first part of February, there's no reason to float into next week's jobs data. I really don't see a reason at all. It's just not enough of an expectation that it could help rates to risk floating. I think there's more of a potential to see rates creep a little worse than to creep better. We're at some of the better pricing right now. The rate bond, loans that close a month from now, the second half of February, then we could wait and see. Maybe the CPI inflation data shows some improvement. Maybe we get a little bit better rates and pricing. We're not likely to see rates drop, but we also leave the door open for something unexpected to happen. So from what's expected, we wouldn't see improvement. For unexpected, we might. And then anything closing 30 plus days, I would float. You can cautiously float because floating gets you a better lock window, gets you some better pricing. And it's not likely that we see rates really move up from here. So there's really not much of a concern with that stuff. That's kind of my take on all of this. Let's go through some of your comments and we'll circle back on some of the things that you said. Ron said the best option is Warsh, and he is not a puppet. And that's kind of the problem. There was an article yesterday, I think it might have been in Bloomberg or Wall Street Journal, and they talked about that Trump keeps vacillating amongst the 4 choices. He's got Warsh, Hassett, Waller, and I forgot who the 4th was. It was a guy over at BlackRock. And so I don't think he's and that's the thing. Trump talks about disloyalty in the article, how they say what he wants to hear in the interview, and then they go out on their own and they have independence. He does not want the central bank to be independent. He wants to control it. That's not evil. He's a control freak. It's what he is. We've always known that. And people act like that is some terrible thing because there's an argument, and Powell made this argument in his press conference yesterday. And by the way, I talked about the politics versus the policy, and he did. He got all the same questions that I said he was going to get, and he did exactly what I said he would do, and he deflected them all. But he did talk about that the central bank around the world, central banks need to be independent of politics. And that, let's see. Hold on. Okay. So he talked about how they need to be independent. And that's the thing. So he was asked again if he will stay on as a Fed governor, a voting member after his chair term ends in May. Normally the Fed governor would go ahead and retire, and resign his position. Powell doesn't want to stay, but Powell may feel obligated to stay in order to maintain the Fed's independence. And that's a big part of what you see being mentioned here. So there's basically out of the governors, whoever takes Moran's position is expected to be another Trump disciple. I don't want to say puppet. We'll say disciple. Bowman is a big Trump, agenda. She's doing a whole thing with the supervisory position. Waller, and I'm curious to see if Waller doesn't get selected, if he continues to toe the line. I think I could see. What do you think, Ron? I think I could see Waller kind of get a little pissed, and maybe he doesn't do it quite the same way. So, but the idea is that Powell may stay because he doesn't want to give Trump the opportunity to put in one of Trump's followers into the Fed as a voting member, as a governor, and control which direction it goes. His term is up in 2028, which would be at the end of Trump's term. And then the new president would be able to put somebody in. So I'm curious to see. He could arguably be leaving a lot of money on the table. The dude is in his 70s. When he retires from the Fed, he's going to be able to go on speaking tours and all kinds of stuff and get paid a lot of money. Does he, there's a lot at play here. So I'm curious. I'm curious to see how this plays out. We will see. Ron's been very vocal, so appreciate you, Ron. You don't see anything telling us the market does not believe we need further cuts. CME tells us what to expect, not what to believe. They know the Fed is very political, will not cut into the current leadership unless they are hitting the head with a 2x4. I don't think we need further cuts, but that's just me. Not yet, not right now. The Fed is always watching data in the rearview mirror. Transitory inflation is still impactful. Randy said, true, very true. Randy sounds like he wants to see it, a cut. Reader, he's like Powell. He will say what Trump wants to hear and then look at his history. The guy who led the FOMC to cut rates by 50 basis points right before an election does not want the Fed to be political. Right. Again, you know what, though? I think if he was going to do it right before an election, he would have done it a couple of meetings before the election, and kept going. But that's me. I really don't. Labor stabilization on the same day as Amazon laying off 16,000, UPS laying off 30,000 people. Yeah, but that's part of the market, and those being laid off are argued. I saw that they're still saying that there's a glut because of COVID and the pandemic. So I don't know if there's truth behind that or not. Ron pointed out, once again, the Fed's behind and idiots. The lagging PC data shows inflation at 2.8. Real-time data from Truflation is 1.46. The Fed's more concerned about inflation versus labor. I don't know that any Fed rate cuts help labor at all on this one. I really don't. But that's another argument that we could make. So anyway, well, it's I do love all of your comments. Let's take a look and see your question of the day. Faye wants cracked pepper chips. I love pepper, but not on my potato chips. Holly Johnson, Doritos or Michigan cherry barbecue chips? I never heard of Michigan cherry barbecue chips. I'm not a big Doritos person or a barbecue. Anyone else big on those? Not me. Cheetos, crunchy or puff? Good old plain kettle cooked chips. Now, there we go. Pringles, dude, Pringles changed their recipe and I do not like them anymore. Google that. They changed their stuff. They're nasty now. They really are. And so did Reese's. Reese's definitely changed something in their recipe. They taste like chalk. Allison Foy likes Miss Vic jalapeno chips. I do see those once in a while, the little bags. Those are definitely good. What else we got? Sour cream and onion, good old classic. I do like Lay's sour cream and onion. Again, I used to like the Pringles one. Pringles changed their chips, man. I'm not a big fan of what those chips have become and where they're at. So anyway, I'm gonna wrap it up, y'all. It is 10 a.m. We're here 26 minutes. I want to cut these shorter, and yet I get longer. But we're having fun. So thank you for joining me. Tomorrow we'll talk about what's going on with that PPI producer price index. We'll talk about what next week could bring with the labor market data. And that's about it. So hopefully you'll join me tomorrow. Same bat time, same bat channel. See you then. Have a great one, my friends. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.